we were just talking that you run some ultra marathons, and so you seem to be like a glutton for pain, because I also just saw you put
Yes.
down your entire hardwood floors by hand. That's your most recent video, right? This is
Yeah.
October 23rd. That's cool. Uh, but that's crazy. How was we'll get into your background, but how was that project for you?
The flooring was it was dumb. I, I,
How exhausted are you?
it wasn't tiring really. It was just monotonous and slow because there were about 1,700 nails, and every single one of them had to be pre-drilled, and every single one of them had to be nailed in, and then single one of them had to come back with a nail set and drive it all the way home. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it was just time consuming. It was a lot of time on the knees, and well,
Did you start like hallucinating at all? Like I know when people do like repetitive tasks over and over again, like their brains start doing crazy stuff.
no, not on the flooring. I've hallucinated on a couple of training runs, but never with hand tools. Maybe I should try that harder.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. Uh, well, I actually want to ask about your running for a second. How long have you been running?
I've been running for well, off and on for 6 years. I started 6 years ago. I just decided, one day I want to do a marathon out of the blue. I'd never run a mile in my life, and I want to do a marathon. So
Yeah,
I trained up, I ran a marathon, and then quit running. 4 months of training for a marathon, and then I stopped. But then
yeah.
I ended up putting on a little over 100 pounds, and 3 years later, I finally got tired and went back to running to lose the weight and eating right, and over 6 months lost that. And so running was an enjoyable thing for that, but once I lost the weight, I quit running. um, and I just remembered thinking back on that. It was about 2 years ago, and then I thought, I was always happy when I was out running. Maybe I should do that again. So then I started
Yeah.
running, and 5K wasn't enough, and 10K wasn't enough, and half marathon wasn't enough, and marathon wasn't enough. And well, now I'm an ultra marathoner planning to run a 200-mile race in the not too distant future. So
That's nuts. That's so great. What do people say? Or actually, when you tell people that you're an ultra marathoner, or you tell them that you work with just hand tools, which reaction do you get the most? Like, man, you're crazy from?
I get about the same reaction from both, and both of
Okay.
them usually come from a stance of not understanding what it is, what's going on.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
people can understand, a 5K or a half marathon, but anything longer than that, it doesn't compute. There's nothing to compare it to.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with hand
Yeah.
tools. Most people don't even realize that it can be done, so there isn't even a schema that they can fit into. How much work is it going to take to dimension a board with just hand tools? So it's most people are like, oh yeah, that's cool. I like that, but they have no idea what it actually means.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Well, I want to get into your background. Think I was listening to an interview from the last year, late last year, that you had done on one of the YouTube channels. And did I see that your dad was into construction? Is that kind of how you got into working and DIY?
Yeah, my father was a pastor, and during the winters, it was a nice thing to be able to do some woodworking. So a friend in the church had a shop that would make most people drool. It had routers with dedicated bits, had a 30-inch thickness or planer. He had
Yeah.
I think it was like a 20-inch joiner. It was something pretty big like
Okay.
that. So it was a tricked out shop with all the best things, and so that's where my dad learned to do woodworking. And I was about 5 or 6 at the time, so I was always stumbling in the shop behind him, catching the board out the end of the table saw, and helping him move things around, and learning things like that. But by the time I was 6, I was making my own things in the shop and enjoying it. And from then on, I always had a power tool shop. I had the whole 9 yards: bandsaw, table saw, joiner. And I was always in my dad's shop until I got married and moved out of the house, and I got my own shop, and I had all the cool tools. I never touched a
Yeah.
hand plane in my life, and I don't think I ever sharpened a chisel. I didn't have any way to sharpen it.
Yeah.
If it got dull, I just went to the store and got a new one, and that's
Yeah.
all I knew about him. Until about 5 years ago, we started moving quite a bit. and every time we moved into a smaller space, and I ended up selling tools and selling more tools. And then a couple of houses ago, we moved into a house that I had no garage, I had no basement space, I had no space for a shop. So I moved everything into storage, and out of that storage, we kind of got to the point where, why are we storing this stuff? Let's just sell it all off. And I sold all of my tools, everything I
Yeah.
had, and I just, I kind of threw my hands up and I guess I said, I'm never doing woodworking again. I guess that's the end of it. It was kind of sad, but oh well, that's life. I move on to other things.
Yeah.
But then we came to the conclusion that my job in theater, I finally got my dream job, and that's one of the reasons why we're moving. Is I was focusing on my dream job, and I finally got it, and it was a blast, and I was absolutely loving it. But we were paying the babysitter, because we had 3 kids. We were paying the babysitter just a little bit less than I was making, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it just wasn't making any sense for me to be working just to be paying the babysitter when my wife is she's a RN and makes more than I could dream of. And so we just decided, I'll quit my job, we'll move back to family, and we'll live off what my wife makes, and I'll be a stay-at-home dad. That was a lot of fun, but being a stay-at-home dad would just drive me bonkers. I've got to have something I can do.
Yeah.
One day I came across a video from a YouTube channel called Worth the Effort. He's another predominantly hand tool guy. Does a lot of fun things, but he was making a grooving plane using only hand tools. And after seeing him use this grooving plane, it was just like this light bulb moment of, oh wow, I could actually do woodworking in my basement. In the house we moved into, I had a small space, about 8 foot by 10 foot, that I could turn into a shop and make a bench, and it would be quiet, so I could have the kids with me. It would be, no power tools, so it'd be safe for the kids. It would be no dust. So I could actually have the kids in the shop when I'm working. So I could, be a stay-at-home dad and still do woodworking. Well, yeah, and so that's how I got into woodworking. That was, about 3 years ago. And so up until that point, I never touched a hand plane in my life. I'd never sharpened anything. And it was just kind of that that cool light bulb moment that everything took off from.
Yeah, that's cool. When you were, no, you're fine. When you were young and in your dad's shop, or I guess the shop he was going to, is there a project that sticks out that you remember working on, like that, maybe that first one?
Well, the first thing I ever made was a Boy Scout car, the Pine Box Derby. But all the kits from the store were these little pine blocks that everyone would then put weights into the bottom to try and, make them go a little faster, put more energy into them. But I was in a wood shop, and I had oak and maple and all these woods. And I was like, I'm going to make my own. And so we sculpted it on a bandsaw and shaped it out and sanded it down, and it made it look really nice. It didn't perform very well, but it looked great.
Yeah.
But I think
that's cool.
The first big furniture project I did is I made a dresser, 6.5 foot tall, 2 foot deep, 3.5 foot wide, huge, massive dresser. Had no idea what I was doing, really. And it worked great though. It was a nice dresser. It was functional. It wasn't terribly pretty, but it worked, and I was very proud of it. It did not last through all of my moves. It was all dowel joinery, and it just wasn't built terribly strong. It was built fairly much like an IKEA build, but with dowels as opposed to wood joinery. And the move to the house we're in right now, it finally fell apart. It literally fell apart while carrying it into the house. And so all the lumber from that got turned into the coffee table, which was my first full hand tool woodworking furniture piece.
Oh, cool. Real cool. So Dusty, you went to University of Wisconsin in Madison, but you had your degree was in theater. Is that right? Or technical theater? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, my undergrad was in biblical counseling. Then my master's was in technical theater, so that was quite a jump. But that's all.
Yeah.
It's the the basically engineering for building sets, some lighting,
Oh, cool.
some audio, but mostly the structural components and designing the set to withstand what the director needs it to do, and then the actual building of it. So it was a lot of steel work, a lot of coming up with new technical ways, all the special effects, things like that all fell under the purview of the technical director.
That's cool.
That was
And
my dream job, is
uh,
moving out to Pennsylvania. I got to do this on a theater out there called Sight and Sound, and they would pump in like $7 million into a set, and so I got to build like
oh, cool.
moving mountains that would be GPS controlled and fully autonomous, and filled with all these
Oh,
technical
wow.
effects. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Now I'm a hand tool guy.
Yeah. I know that's what's crazy because listened to the Crafted podcast, and so I thought you were just straight hand tools, but then you're like, yeah, I've got experience welding, and like you kept talking about things you've done before. I'm like, he's done like a ton of stuff. Like this isn't just hand tools. What was it like as you were moving and you were, I guess, selling off your equipment? Like, were you like kind of accepting, hey, this is kind of the next step, or was it like, this is hard to get rid of this stuff?
I'm very flexible. I grew up
Okay.
moving constantly. I mean, I've moved 25 times and lived in 9 different states. So I've been all over the place. Every time we moved
Wow.
from about like 6 years on, if 6 years old, I was always picking up jobs, working construction, working siding, working roofing, trim work inside, laying flooring, and all the things I could do. I was just I enjoyed that. I was homeschooled, so wherever we moved, I could do my schooling in the evening and work in the morning, and I like that. And so every time we moved, I learned a new trade, and that's just kind of my life. And I went to college for my biblical counseling, thinking I'm going to follow in my father's footsteps and be a pastor. And then I said, no, I'm going
Okay.
to go into theater. And so it was just another step, and everything. Uh, I don't get too attached to anything, and it kind of becomes a I'm okay with transition. I'm okay with moving on, and so that was just the next step.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I know video, it seems like, has been a part of your story for a while because you've had, did I see there was a channel where you were building a plane? Is that right?
Yeah, I think I have 8 working channels right now. I
Oh, wow.
And that's really where the hand tool channel came from. Is I Whenever I start a new hobby, I document it for myself, and I document it by shooting videos. This is what I completed
Gotcha.
today. This is what I learned. This is what I purchased for it. And talking about those in video form is good for me because I can go back and look at them in the future. And I did the exact same thing with hand tools. And I've kept all my newest videos, all my oldest videos on my channel. So if you go back on my channel and you look at my first few videos, it's like, hey, look, I just bought a hand plane. Now I'm going to go restore it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I can go through all those things of, um, buying my first hand plane, buying my first set of chisels, building my first bench with construction lumber. And they're not the greatest videos. They're videos intended for me to just document what I'm doing. Um, but a lot of people like going back and look at those and seeing, I started with $12. I bought a handsaw that I got at a big box store, and they had it was basically free. They had a rebate for the price of the saw, so it was the cheapest one they had. I bought a set of Harbor Freight chisels, and then I bought a hand plane for $5 that was completely rusted.
Oh, wow.
And so for $12, I built my shop, and I started with just those three
That's cool.
tools and started working from there. So
Yeah.
it's
So
kind of the thing that anyone can follow.
yeah. Did I see your first video then on the WoodbyWright channel? Was that September 2015? Is that about right?
Yeah, something like that.
What, because
It's
you
only
said you were,
2015. Maybe it was 24. It was only 2 years ago. Only 2 years. Okay, wow.
wow, that's
It
nuts.
seems like even longer to me.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were making those videos almost as like a document to yourself for later. At what point did you realize like other
Mhm.
people like were watching your videos and it wasn't just like people, maybe like your family or friends?
Um, well, actually, I had a friend randomly come up to me and say, "Yeah, I watched your video about making a mallet," and I'm like, how did you find my video? I had, a dozen subscribers at the time, just
Yeah.
the random people that trickle in. Um, and it was one of those odd ideas of, okay, someone's watching this, maybe I should, talk to it as if someone else is there.
Yeah.
And then I think somewhere around 80 subscribers, which would have been in like December of that year, Matt Cremona posted a video of me making the coffee table.
Oh, cool.
And it was like, okay,
Yeah.
there's actually people who want to see this.
Yeah.
And overnight, I went to like 300 or 400 subscribers, and it was that moment I just decided, I'm gonna learn what it takes to actually turn this into making decent videos that other people want to watch. So
Yeah.
it
What?
wasn't like I started out with that. It was something that kind of grew over time.
Yeah. What were some of those lessons that you learned? Like, kind of how have those videos transitioned as you've?
Oh, learning in video. Well, number one, it's how do you talk to a camera without it? Number one, feeling it's always going to feel somewhat odd to you, but
Yeah.
how do you talk to it without it coming across as feeling odd? And then there's all the technical things of audio is so much more important than people think,
Yeah.
and mastering good audio is very, very difficult. And I haven't gotten there yet. It's something I'm still working on. And then you're working with video quality and learning all the editing, and it's just 1,000 little steps that you have to take one at a time. You can't jump into it and do it all great. It's through regular iterations of doing it over and over again and learning from your mistakes and seeing how you can make something better. I think that's one of the reasons why I ended up, because I'm normally putting out 3 videos a week. And I did that because it was I found ways of making them faster, and I found
Uh-huh.
ways of learning from my stuff faster. And I kind of realized ahead of time I've got a lot I need to learn and how to do this, and so
Yeah.
the only way I'm going to do it is to put out more videos that I can learn from.
Gotcha.
So,
So
yeah.
flipping it to the hand tool side, since in the grand scheme of things, like you've only been doing it for a few years. From back when you purchased that like first hand plane and you restored it to now, like have there been some big things or maybe some misconceptions that are out there about like hand tools? They're like, oh, like this is a lot different than I thought going into it.
Oh, there's a lot. Well, there's the whole mindset that's very, very different. In the power tool world, when something is dull, you replace it.
Yeah.
Or if it's very expensive, you send it to someone to be sharpened,
Yeah.
which might happen like once a year. Whereas in the hand tool world, because you are the power behind it, you have to learn. There's a gradient from deadly sharp to so dull that it won't cut anything. And you have to learn where in that gradient do you want to stop? Where in that gradient do you want to actually sharpen?
Yeah.
And learning what it feels like to be dull, and then learning how to sharpen it. You end up, sharpening every day,
Yeah.
almost every tool you touch, and it's a different mindset that the sharpening process is the woodworking. It's not, it's not something that's disposable and changeable. But there's a lot of things like that. Even just like how you hold a chisel. The power tool person almost always wants to use a chisel or a plane with the bevel up. It makes a logical sense to have the bevel up because your force is in line with the cutting motion when the bevel is up. But when the bevel's up, you have far less control. You have other problems that come into it with steeper angles, harder to use. And a hand tool person becomes very, very familiar with putting the bevel down. With a chisel for carving into things, you get far more control, you get far more use out of it. The only thing is you have to be used to putting the force in the direction of the bevel rather than in the direction of the chisel itself.
Huh.
And that's a mindset change that once you suddenly click that, everything becomes a little bit different in how you affect it. And then as to tools in general, I think a lot of people, particularly in hand tools, feel that you see all of these hand tools being used and a vast collection of new and used and antique, and every tool for every style and tools that get used for one very specific purpose. It's not like power tools where you have your router, your table saw, your drill, and your planer, and you can do just about anything you want.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that one of the big misconceptions is that you've got to have a large collection of hand tools in order to do the work. Now, I have a large collection of hand tools now, but you don't need that. If you have a saw, a chisel, and a plane, you can make anything you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, some steps are going to take a little bit longer, and that is a good thing, because the only way you're going to learn hand tools is to do. Whereas, with a power tool, if I were to set up a table saw and I set up the fence right and I put a feather board on there and I spend the time to set it up, any monkey can run boards through a table saw all day long and produce perfect cuts. I can set up a handsaw perfectly and set every tooth exactly and sharpen the thing within an inch of its life. And you're not going to be able to follow a line unless you spend several dozen hours cutting. I can teach you how to hold your arm so it becomes better, it becomes easier. But even then, you're still not going to improve until you do it. And I think a lot of people run into that wall with hand tools. Whereas with power tools, if you spend the money and you spend the time in the setup, you'll end up with a good product.
Yeah.
And hand tools, you can spend all the money in the world, you can spend all the time in the setup. You're not going to get a good product until you learn how to use it. And the only way to learn how to use it is to do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people really get frustrated with that I spent all the money and it's set up perfectly, but I'm getting bad results. And people get frustrated with that.
Yeah. And I know you've got a great series. I'll include definitely in the show notes. I think about 6 months ago, where you had, if folks that are wanting to get into hand tools, and you walk through like, this is what I recommend for the beginner and the intermediate. But to scale that even further down, what's like the tool that you find yourself using just the most? You mentioned you have a ton of them, but what's kind of your go-to that you always know you're going to use in the shop?
The 2-inch chisel.
Okay.
Excuse me, the 1/2-inch chisel. Honestly, I'm going to be doing a project here in the next few weeks where I'm going to build a box out of a piece of firewood using only a chisel.
Oh, cool.
And every tool you use is just a jig for holding a chisel.
Yeah.
Even like the table saw, it's just a whole bunch of chisels in a line, and the rest of the saw is just how do you move those chisels through the work.
Yeah.
And if you think about it in that mindset, even a handsaw is just a bunch of chisels or a bunch of knives. You can easily do anything you want with just a chisel, as long as you think about, if I want to plane down a board with a chisel, either I can make a jig to hold the chisel just right, which is a plane, or I can teach myself to hold the chisel with just my hands and plane a board. And you can do anything with just a chisel.
That's cool.
It just takes more time.
Yeah. At what point did you, it definitely takes more time. Actually, funny, when my dad was helping me, we've got a baby on the way. And so we were painting like a nursery, and I forget what he had to get something out of like a little crack. And like, I had these, like, they're not super expensive. They're like the little like DeWalt like chisel set, I think from like Home Depot, but like I sharpened them down. Like I got a great point on them. And then I walk out and my dad's like out there, like treating it like a screwdriver and just like hammering into like something with it. And I'm like, oh no, like it had like the good, he's like, no, it's fine. I'm like, no, like I sharpened them. Like it was hard to get that. But all that to say, when was it, when did you realize sharpening was like a really big deal? And you mentioned like knowing when something's sharpened versus when it's dull. Like, was that just really early on when you were storing that plane?
No, I mean, it's something that you'll be learning for the rest of your life. Now, the first project that I had was building my bench. And that is, I had a folding table that I brought down 24 2x4s, stud grade 2x4s. And I had to then plane down all these 2x4s by hand. And pine is fairly easy, but it has knots and it has reversing grain and it has things that make it difficult. And that was a great learning experience, because I bought the plane and I got this cheap sharpening stone that was designed for knives. Mm-hmm. And so I figured, oh, that feels sharp, that feels good, I'm going to use that. And it worked. It cut. It felt great until the next time I sharpened it, I got a little bit sharper, and I felt that was like, oh, this is what sharp feels like.
Yeah.
And then the next time I sharpened it, I got a little bit better at it. I was like, oh, no, this is what sharp feels like. And so every time I could get a little bit sharper, I suddenly realized that there's a whole nother step to it. And every time you do that, then you suddenly realize that you get comfortable with that really, really sharp feeling. And when it starts to get dull, then you're like, oh, let's go and sharpen it. I don't want to feel that anymore. And the more you spend with it, the more you tend to hold yourself to that really sharp edge, and you end up sharpening more and more and more. And so it's something you grow with over time. And um, if you don't have someone to show you, right off the bat, this is what sharp really feels like. It's a whole experimental process,
Yeah.
and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing to learn and feel and grow through. But a lot of people want to skip that step and want to have someone sharpen it up quickly and show you this is what it should feel like. But
Yeah.
everyone's a little different.
Yeah, yeah. And I know it seems like woodworkers in general are perfectionists, and they always kind of have the best finish or have the smoothest plane. Is there like a too sharp? Like, is there a point where you're like, hey, you can get it sharper, but it's not. It's diminishing returns at a certain point.
I think there is kind of in a mindset way. A lot of people like to put a secondary bevel or a back bevel on it to speed up the sharpening process, and I think that also comes from the power tool mindset, is that the sharpening isn't woodworking, so we've got to get through it to get to the woodworking. Whereas the hand tool mindset is, the sharpening is the woodworking. And so I don't use any back bevels. I don't use any secondary bevels. And now that I've gotten used to it, I can sharpen just as fast as anyone who does, or uses the ruler trick, which I don't have any problem with that. That's not an issue. I don't have any issue with that. I think that a lot of people are trying to find a system that is fast, that produces a sharp edge, and they can get back to woodworking. And I think that a lot of people spend too much time in that system. But there isn't such a thing as too sharp. The sharper you get it, the better your cut will be. And the finer the work you want to do, the sharper it'll need to be. So, I mean, if I'm rough dimensioning a board and using my scrub plane I rarely sharpen. I mean, I might sharpen it once every 3 or 4 months, and it's really dull. But oh well. It's just the rough plane that hogs through material.
Yeah.
Now, my smoothing plane, on the other hand, if I do more than like 4 or 5 square feet with the board, I'm going to take it back and sharpen it. It's something that I sharpen every time I get, if I'm using it for 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to go sharpen it again. I keep that as deadly sharp as I can possibly get it. So I mean, there's a continuum of what you're going to be wanting to do with it.
Oh yeah, and I know you've got a really great video that I'll include a link with your sharpening station with is it 3 DMT diamonds, and you have a strobe. Is that pretty much your go-to? Like, that's how you sharpen everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for all of my straight edges, that's what I do it on. The only thing I don't is if there's a concave edge, such as like the inside of a carving chisel.
Gotcha.
But all the convex edges and all the straight edges are done with 3 stones and a strop.
Well, I kind of want to get into your schedule a little bit, or just what it looks like, especially since. So, how old are your kids now?
Right now they are 4, 6, and 7.
Okay, so you've got I guess the 4-year-old is at home all the time. Is that right?
Yeah, he's at home, okay. And then 1st grade and 2nd grade.
1st grade, 2nd grade. So, what's it like staying at home and balancing like your kids as well as doing woodworking? Like, how does that work, or does it just change depending on what they're doing?
It is a constant juggling act because my wife works 3 to 4 days a week. She works 12-hour shifts.
Oh wow! Okay.
So, and they're completely different. She'll work weekends every 3rd week, but everything in between it's completely random. You never know what days she's going to be working. I mean, they're scheduled out about a month ahead of time, but they're completely different. So I live on days when my wife works, and days when my wife doesn't work, and days when it's kind of in between, where we have things we have to get done in the house. So she's still officially working, but she's here. And so if she's working, then usually I have, the 8 hours in the morning when the kids are at school, and I just have Arthur here. I can really buckle down and do things. If I have a video where I'm talking through something, I'm not actually building anything. I can do an entire video during that time. I can shoot it, edit it, and upload it during that time. That's cool. And that's a very efficient time for me. Then a lot of my build projects, I'm just trying to fit them in here and there. So I'll work on them for 20, 30 minutes, then go do something else. Then I'll come back for 20, 30 minutes, then go do something else. So when my wife's at home and I want to spend a lot of family time, I do a lot of that little in-between things where I'll go play a game with the family, and then I'll go downstairs and work on the shop for 20, 30 minutes. And then I'll,
That's cool.
go on my run, and then I'll come back and work on it for a little bit. So I try and keep very flexible, but I am very scheduled.
Gotcha.
Um, that the only way that I can fit in all those blocks is actually to schedule them all out. And I live and die by my calendar because
Yeah.
I try and schedule out the next week or so of when am I going to be able to get all the content needed for those videos, and fit it all in there.
Yeah.
That's the driving thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I definitely don't want to keep you too long to keep you from the schedule blocks that I'm sure you have later today. We got a couple questions that we ask everybody that comes on. You might have already mentioned it. So it's the make or break show, and so so two questions on the make side of things. Is there a favorite project that you have? Doesn't have to be something that even that you filmed, but something that you just look back on. I love this thing.
Valentine's Day 2 years ago. So, well, 2 years
Okay.
from this February, I made a box for my wife. And looking back at it now, it's kind of a mishmash. It was back when I was really first getting into hand tools, and I had all this wood on hand, and so I have Padauk and Purple Heart and Oak and Sapele and all these colors into it, and carving, and it's kind of busy, but it's still one of my favorites. It's a very cool piece that I spent a lot more time than I was expecting on it, but it was something I had my heart into because I was making it for my wife. And it was a really kind of a cool video a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll make, for guys that are listening, I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. Well, cool. Well, so then on the break side of things, is there a project that really went wrong that stands out to you? And was there something kind of like you learned because of it?
Yes. About a year ago, I decided to make a cabinet scraper. Because I hadn't seen anyone else make a cabinet scraper. I've seen a few jigs for holding a card scraper, but not, a cabinet scraper with two handles on it. And I thought, well, how hard is that? It's a way to hold a card that you have a hole through it and you
Yeah.
can use it. But yeah. Um, and so I started into it, just kind of experimenting, play with things, and my goal was to build it in one day and just film it and be done. And it fell apart. It was one problem after another, and I just hadn't thought through it at all. And it was a bad build that I learned a lot about how I do things, how I work through things, what can be done, what can't be done, how to work it better. So I ended up actually making a video about that, how not to build a cabinet scraper. And then next week built a video on, this is how I want to do it, and actually built one that I learned from all my mistakes and built one that was quality.
Yeah.
So that was a very good learning experience.
Yeah, yeah. Do you find that since you're doing hand tools and I guess the speed is slower, that like mistakes aren't as drastic? Like if you're running something through the table saw and like something gets caught, like you can break the whole board, or do you still find that you can still make some pretty quick mistakes?
Um, yes and no. Mistakes as in cutting myself. Um, every tool I have is flesh sensing. Um, so I probably scratch myself more with hand tools than I would with power
Okay.
tools. But the chances of a large disaster of cutting off a finger or really slicing into yourself are a lot less. Um, so there is that aspect of it, but the actual problems in the build, um, it kind of goes back and forth because sometimes you really get into this mindset. You get in this machine mindset. I've got 34 boards I need to plane down. And I go into it and I'm just marching through it, and you plane down through 34 boards, and then you realize, wait a second, I was off.
Oh no,
um,
yeah,
that still happens. But I think just as often there are a lot of times where I'll realize after the first or second joint that I'm doing. Like usually, if I have a project, there's four mortise and tenons on just about everything, because you fit everything together. There's four joints, four corners, and so you're always making one item to match another. As opposed with power tools, you might make all the tenons and then you make all the mortises,
yeah,
and because you're going off of measurements, if the first one fits, then they all fit.
yeah,
Whereas with hand tools, you might make the first mortise and then you make the tenon, but it doesn't matter what their measurement is as long as they fit together. So you're making whatever the second item is to match the first item.
Gotcha.
And so every piece you're doing, you're making to fit. So there's a little bit less problem with that, because even though you're making 4 of them, you're really making 4 individual joints. You're not making 4 at one time. And so if you're messing up one, it's usually just one joint that's messed up. And a lot of times then you can easily fix the one or replace the one as opposed to replacing all of them. So that becomes a little bit easier that way, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. Well, I appreciate your time. It was a blast chatting with you. Is WoodbyWright, is that the best place you send people to if they want to check out your stuff?
Yeah. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook mostly. I'm on a few other places, but those are the ones I'm regularly on.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. It was a blast chatting.
Indeed. Thanks for having me.